So if you haven't guessed, I'm Janet Peace. I'm the Senior Vice President for Policy and Business Strategy at C2ES, and I had the great pleasure to be the moderator for this next session. So you heard a little bit from Alex Liffman, our first speaker, about how companies are thinking about climate change and climate resilience. And in this next session, we're going to build on that in the business perspective, and we've asked 3 companies from 3 very different sectors, and Alex was very kind to start that conversation and kind of give the landscape. We've got Melissa Lavinson from PG&E, Electricity and Power Company. We've got Jay Bruns from the Hartford. I love that, environmental champion. Is that really in your title? I love that. And we've got Roberta Barbieri from Diageo, a food and beverage company. And I'd like to invite them up at this point, and we'll have a little bit of opening remarks, and then a little discussion. I'll ask a few questions, and then again, I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience. So with that. So Melissa, do you want to get this started and give us your perspective on climate change and climate resilience?
Sure. And first, thank you, Janet, and thanks to C2ES and to Bank of America for hosting today's dialogue. It's a really important one, and it's an issue that at PG&E we've been focused on for many years now, both recognizing that we have a responsibility as a power company serving 16 million people throughout California to both reduce our carbon footprint and also to address issues related to a changing climate. And so we've done a lot of analysis and identified risks, and I think some of them are probably pretty self-evident to folks. From our perspective, risks to our system, wildfires, which we're experiencing now in California, drought, which we're experiencing. We've had severe storms, flooding, and temperature changes, which can really increase the number of heating days, high heat days that you have, so increase the number of cooling days that we need throughout our service area. And again, we serve 70,000 square miles throughout Northern and Central California, and we are also a hydro-intensive system, as is most of the West. So you could think of a changing climate and changing precipitation patterns as, again, needing to adjust to how we manage our system on a day-to-day basis, but also on a year-to-year basis. And so just to give you a little overview, I'm going to talk just a little bit about 2 aspects. One is the governance and how we manage that within PG&E. And then also just a little bit more detail on some of the drought conditions that we're experiencing and what it means to our system and what we're doing. So from a governance standpoint, really there's sort of 4 big things that we do. One, we've created a very robust emergency response plans and procedures, working in coordination with with our state entities as well as localities. Secondly, one of the things that we've really been focusing on is a very detailed risk assessment process and program at PG&E, which we call our Natural Hazards Performance Assessment. And again, what this program does is it really looks at all of our gas and electric assets, identifies risks, and also, though, enables us to create strategic investment plans for managing risk going forward. We work in close partnership with state, federal, and local entities, including, you've heard a little bit today about DOE's Climate Sector Resilience Partnership, which we were a founding member of. Work very closely with some local think tanks, including the Bay Area Council Economic Institute, to really identify what could something like a superstorm in the Bay Area do from both an economic perspective, but also from an infrastructure perspective, and what role would PG&E play in that. And then finally, one of the things that we've done, which is maybe a little unique to some companies, or particularly I think in our sector, is we have an in-house climate science team. And what this climate science team does is it really works with state entities, with federal entities to understand, and international entities, to really understand the latest and greatest in scientific research. And so we take all that and then we feed that into our natural hazards assessment performance program. And that gets integrated into our broader risk assessment program that we have at PG&E. So it's really an integrated approach that we take to climate adaptation and climate resilience at the company. Again, focusing on near-term, what we can do today, and recognizing we're going to have near-term risks, but also figuring out how can we make our system more resilient going forward so that if we do have significant impacts, that those are limited in duration, and that we have really robust recovery plans so that we can get our customers back online as quickly as possible. then flipping just quickly to the drought, I think, you heard as Bob said, as Amy said, we're experiencing just an amazing drought in California right now, with 3/4 of the state under either exceptional or extreme drought conditions. So that has significant impacts on our customers, on our communities, and also on us as a company. Again, if you think about it from a system that is hydro intensive, and also we have power plants that have cooling needs. And so what does that mean? As well as we have a significant number of assets and facilities around the state. So just even, from a water consumption standpoint for the company. So we've done several things at PG&E. We created an internal drought task force where we brought together all aspects of the company to, one, identify what the potential impacts could be on our system, but also to drive strategies to actually reduce water consumption at our facilities and also in our operations. We've been taking a very careful approach to managing our water assets, our reservoirs. Again, we have the largest investor-owned hydro system in the country, and so we do have reservoirs. And so we've been managing those reservoirs and managing our system in a way to ensure that we had enough water available so that we could generate enough electricity in the summer to meet peak demand, because that is our most intensive season. But also we have a responsibility with that system to ensure we have the available water resources to manage fisheries and also downstream water usage by communities. We've also entered into water sharing agreements with communities, including working with the county of San Luis Obispo, actually, to take excess water from a desalination unit that we have at our nuclear power plant to help them fight fires this year. So we've basically filled up their firefighting reservoirs with excess water from the desalination unit and trucked it off site to help them. And then again, working with our customers. I think Amy mentioned that about 20% of all electricity used in California is used in some way, shape, or form to manage water, whether it's pumping, moving, or utilizing it at the end use. And so that energy-water nexus is really significant. So really working with our customers to both have them understand how their energy usage is impacting water usage, and also create incentives and programs for them to both reduce energy and therefore reduce their costs, but also reduce their water usage. So I think I'll just leave it at there because I know we want to have a dialogue. So thank you again very much.
Wow, California's really got some issues.
We've got some issues.
Jay, why don't you give us your perspective
Well,
here?
Janet, thank you, and C2ES and Alex Liftman and Bank of America for hosting this today and for inviting me to give you one insurance company's perspective on business resiliency. Just a little bit about our company. The Hartford is a 205-year-old insurance company based in Hartford, Connecticut. We are a leader in property casualty insurance, group benefits, and mutual funds. A little background on the company. I mean, we've covered a lot of the natural disasters that have befallen the United States almost since its founding. We covered claims during the Great Chicago Fire, the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, 9/11, and lots of hurricanes, fires, and tornadoes over the course of our history. I'm going to start with a premise that our Insurance Information Institute, which is the kind of research arm, it goes up and down depending on the year and depending on the effects of each peril are different, but there's this unmistakable trend. And the Hartford and the insurance industry generally follows the science. So this is we're very interested in following this trend and trying to stay ahead of it. When we look at how we manage our own risks, as you might imagine, almost the definition of an insurance company is an organization that manages risk. And so we have a very well built out way to do that. We have obviously a chief risk officer who sits in our C-suite, reports to our CEO, and his job every day is to oversee the operations of our very large enterprise risk management function. He doesn't do this alone, though. We have a committee that is that the CEO and he sit on, but it also is on the committee are our chief financial officer, our chief investment officer, the presidents and COOs of each of our business segments and our general counsel. Their job is to assess and to approve the amount of risk that the Hartford takes on. Ultimately, the responsibility for overall risk management lies with our board of directors. Our risk management area devises and always continually works on and tweaks a risk appetite framework. So we're trying to figure out how much risk we want to take on as a company. And it's this committee that approves that, and then the board that also reviews it. We think we do this pretty well. We've gotten some external validation here recently. The New York Stock Exchange Governance Services gives an award every year. They gave the leadership award this year to the Hartford for best governance, risk, and compliance program at a large cap company. So we think we're doing that reasonably well. When it comes to, so that's kind of generally how we view things as a company to make sure that we stay resilient, and that's aside from the business resiliency efforts that we do. We train for fires and for severe weather events and work from home and all of the things that you might imagine a company that is focused on risk does to make sure that we can operate in the event of a severe weather event that affects our own company. But more to the point here, I think we try to help our customers deal with severe weather events. One way we do that is we have a catastrophe information center that's open 24/7, where we give advice to our individual customers and commercial customers on the steps that they can take to protect themselves in the event of in the face of different perils. We also, obviously, we react when there is a peril. We can get our people, our claims staff and others into an area very quickly that has been affected. We have a fleet of mobile response vehicles that go out, including one that we added to our fleet 2 years ago, a very large RV that has its own power supply. It has satellite capability. It has a capability to prepare food for people who may need it. And as you might imagine, if they don't have power at home, they may not be able to get cash because ATMs go out. So it has a mobile ATM machine as well that people can use. And this vehicle's already crisscrossed the country and has been put in service. Obviously, we do our own bit to try to reduce our own greenhouse gas emissions. We've reduced them by over 50% since 2007. And we also try to help spur renewable energy by offering to insure that. We have our own renewable energy insurance practice that looks to insure wind farms, solar farms, fuel cell, and biomass. It's a small but growing area of our company. We think that there's a lot of upside if you think that there are 90 wind farms that are being built in the United States so far, or right now. And we have some success. In 2011, we were the company that ensured the installation of the largest private solar panel installation in the Western Hemisphere at that point. And we also insure one of the larger hydroelectric projects in the United States. We also try to participate in the dialogue to figure out how businesses can be more resilient. Our CEO was invited to participate in that panel that was discussed earlier on business resilience and climate change. And we have participated in some of the work streams coming out of that. We also do our own polling. in the wake of Superstorm Sandy, we went out and polled 450 small business owners to find out what their experience was. And we found that about 70% lost power, and that prompted a lot of them to have to close their doors. And on average, in that event, they had to keep their doors closed for 7 days. Another interesting fact that we found out is that while only 11% of the companies we polled suffered any structural damage, over half lost business. So, and one of the main ways that small companies had problems was connectivity. They lost a lot of them lost stored critical data at their site, business site, but didn't think to have it somewhere else as well, and they lost that. So, that's a learning that we have tried to amplify and get into the market, that it's important that they do that, that they protect themselves that way. And then more recently, just this year, we did a survey of mid-sized businesses and asked the CEOs and the C-suite whether they had a business continuity plan in place. And 60% of those who we polled responded that yes, they had a formal written business continuity plan in place. Another 1/3 said, well, we have one that is, it's an oral, a verbal plan. 8% admitted that they didn't have a plan. But what's kind of interesting as well is that of those who had the plan, just under 20% said they'd ever practiced it or executed it. Well, we think obviously that they'll be in a better position if they do create these plans and then practice them. So these are the ways that we think that we try to help prepare our customers for an unforeseen event, and then to help them prevail in the event that the unforeseen does happen to them. I'm happy to take questions after.
Very good, thank you. And Roberta, I mean, you guys are a global company. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your perspective on this now.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Janet. Thanks for having me, by the way. Hi, everybody. Roberta Barbieri. I'm with Diageo. I want to just spend 1 minute explaining who Diageo is, in case you're not familiar with the name. Then I'll spend a couple of minutes describing our overall environmental sustainability program. And then I'll dig down into a couple of examples of mitigation activity that we undertake, and then adaptation activities that we've undertaken, which hopefully will bring to life how we view this and deal with climate change risk in Diageo. Diageo is a large producer of alcoholic beverages. You may not have heard of the name Diageo, but I'm hoping at least some of you are familiar with some of our brands. We make Guinness, Johnnie Walker, Captain Morgan, Crown Royal, Smirnoff, and a number of others. We have about 30,000 employees around the world, UK-based company, and we operate about 150 plus distilleries, wineries, breweries, and bottling plants around the globe. We have a fairly robust sustainability and responsibility strategy and program in Diageo. We are into our second generation of sustainability targets. I'll speak strictly to the environmental sustainability portion of our portfolio. We have a series of public targets that are aimed at addressing the environmental impacts across our entire value chain. One of which, as you can imagine, for a beverage company is water. Water is a hugely material risk for any beverage company, any food or beverage company, and particularly for Diageo. The way I like to think of water, for better or worse, is from a climate change risk perspective, water is where the rubber meets the road in a lot of areas, as we're seeing in California, where we make quite a bit of wine. We have a fairly large number of water-stressed facility production locations around the globe. We risk assess our sites for physical risk related to water, regulatory risk related to water, and social reputational risk related to water. And as a result, of this significant material issue that we have a sub-strategy within our overall sustainability strategy specific to water. We call it the Blueprint for Water, and we have some fairly stretching targets and programs in place to manage and mitigate the business risks that face us with regard to water. We have operational efficiency targets for water. We have wastewater treatment targets. We have a water replenishment target that is new to us. We published this at the end of last year, and this means that we will be undertaking projects out in the watersheds where we operate to replenish, if you will, an equivalent amount of water to that we take out of the watershed as an ingredient in our products. So that's just very high level flavor for what our kind of material impacts are and how we address them through an overall sustainability strategy. Let me give you a couple of examples kind of at a tactical level of how we are, first bucket of activity, mitigating our contribution to climate change and risks associated with that. And then I'll speak, as I said, to a couple of examples of where we're adapting to the existing issues that we face with regard to climate change. So from a mitigation perspective, our targets around carbon, which are 9 years old at this point, we issued a second generation at the end of last year, as I mentioned. From the very beginning of this journey for us on mitigating impacts to climate change, our focus was on not just mitigating our contribution, but decoupling our business growth from fossil fuel. We have our carbon target is an absolute target, so it's not normalized against production, and in effect it means that no matter how much our business grows, we have to reduce the absolute carbon emissions that we emit by 50% from our baseline year. We've achieved a 33% reduction already against that target. It's, as I said, eight or 9 years old. And again, the idea is that we reduce and hopefully someday eliminate our contribution to climate change at the same time that we eliminate our dependence on fossil fuels and, as I said, decouple that growth from climate change risk. So we've achieved our 33% carbon emission reduction through just literally hundreds of projects at our plants around the world, from energy efficiency, boiler upgrades, chiller refurbishment, replacing one fossil fuel with less dirty fossil fuel, replacing that with renewable energy. Just, as I said, hundreds of projects that we've implemented over the years across our business. From an adaptation perspective, we, again, focus on anticipating risk specifically related to water because it is so material to our business. We have, as I mentioned, a water risk assessment process that all of our facilities undergo, and we've expanded it to our key agricultural sourcing areas. We are an agricultural company. We don't own a lot in terms of agricultural land, but every single product that we make is based on plants, whether it's grapes in wine, barley in beer, or grain, corn in American whiskey. So we consider ourselves to be an agriculturally based company, and when you look at the water footprint of our products, 70 to 90% of it occurs in the growing of the crops that go into our products. So clearly, when you look at materiality, you immediately focus on agricultural sourcing. So we do water stress risk assessments of our operations and our sourcing areas, and those sites that are determined to be water stressed as a result of that process have more stretching targets imposed on them than the kind of overall water efficiency targets that apply to everyone. In addition, they are required to undertake this replenishment work that I referred to earlier. So from an adaptation perspective, that the goals of our water stress risk assessment process are to identify these risks, not just today, but we project out to 2030, and to put plans in place to maximize our water stewardship of that resource in areas where there is stress, in addition to all of our global operations, so that we mitigate security of supply in terms of water out into the future. The last example that I'll give you of an adaptation activity, which again focuses on agriculture, is something that we did in Kenya. Moving to another part of the world here, we have a very large beer business in Kenya. Make and sell a lot of beer in the Kenyan market. And we buy a tremendous amount of barley. We buy the majority of barley grown for commercial purposes in the country of Kenya, in fact. And we have hundreds of farmers with whom we work. We have robust agricultural extension services working with those farmers. We undertook a modeling project about a year and a half ago, which gets to a point that Bob brought up in his comments about how there's oftentimes a difficulty in identifying science and then making the connection between science and business practices and how that applies to you in your day-to-day business. This is I think a great example of how that connection has been made. We know that temperatures are rising in Kenya. Barley likes cool temperatures. It grows at altitude on the sides of hills and mountains. So rising temperatures and barley growing are not a positive connecting force. So we modeled, based on 3 temperature rising climate change scenarios, what these rising temperatures would do to the amount of land suitable for growing barley in Kenya over time. And we did that on 5-year increments out to 2030. So what would be the impact of increasing temperatures on the ability for farmers to find land at high enough altitude and low enough temperatures to grow barley for our beer business? And we modeled it on 3 different climate change scenarios: a slow temperature rise, a moderate temperature rise, which corresponds to the last 10 years, so that's historic last decade, and then a rapid temperature rise. And the results were startling. In every scenario, the amount of land area suitable for growing barley in Kenya shrank from a low of minus about 5% to a high of over 30%. So you can imagine when we are working with farmers in Kenya to develop supply chains for barley growing in the country, where we also have a local sourcing target. So our intent is to locally source as much barley as we can, and the majority of the barley that we buy is local. We need that data. We need that data to inform our sourcing strategy, both into the short term, so the next 5 years, and out into the long term, into the next 30, because it takes time to develop agricultural supply chains. So we've taken the results of this modeling exercise and we've overlaid it as a lens onto our long-term procurement strategy in Kenya to understand where land is likely to shrink, where it might expand, and make our sourcing and supply chain development decisions accordingly. So hopefully that gives you a flavor for how Diageo is looking at climate change risk. We're living it right now, so it's not a future scenario. The expectation is that it will get stronger, the risk will get higher going forward, the pinch points will intensify, and we hope that through our 2-pronged approach of mitigating the problem, or our contribution to the problem, and then understanding, analyzing, and adapting to the future issues, that we'll be able to ensure supply chain flexibility for our business and long-term business sustainability. So that's
Very,
probably-
very good, very interesting. So I think you'll all agree with me when I say we've got three very sophisticated companies with three experts. I invite you to read their very impressive bios. We've got them printed out in the front. But you guys have thought a lot about these issues, obviously. But there's a lot of small to medium-sized companies that haven't got this really figured out. We had a question about that right off the bat this morning. What kind of advice would you give to a small to medium-sized company who's just trying to figure this out and trying to get started? What would you tell them?
Well, I think, first of all, to small, medium-sized company or to any company, one, would take a step back and take a look at, across your supply chain, across your business units, right? Sit down with your internal stakeholders first and find out, just on a current basis, what are you currently experiencing, right? What are you currently experiencing from supply chain? What are you currently experiencing from operations, right? What are you currently experiencing if you're the energy manager? What are you currently experiencing? What are you seeing? Because I think by just doing that, even having those internal conversations, you're going to learn a lot, particularly if it's very focused on a specific outcome of just trying to really identify, doing that inventory of current impacts. Second thing I would say, and again, big or small companies, is reaching outside of your company, right? There's a lot of work that's going on out there. A lot probably within your own sector that you may not know about. So identifying those partnerships, identifying those opportunities. Most businesses have some trade association. Whether you're a big business or a small business, they exist. They either exist at a state level or they exist at a national level, and many of those associations are actually doing work around this, right? That's part of what they're there for. And they can really be a great resource. And then I would say, the final thing to do is once you've sort of done that, particularly if you're not at that C-suite level, is try to find that C-suite champion to then elevate it, because it's wonderful when it starts at a grassroots and you sort of get all the data and it comes up, but you do at the end of the day need that C-suite champion in order for it to be an enterprise-wide kind of commitment.
Yeah, one of the things we highlight in the report is if you're just getting started and maybe there's not that C-suite support and maybe there's not the resources for this issue, maybe starting smaller and identifying one particular vulnerability so you can build a story around it and kind of elevate the issue, but that's definitely in line of what we were saying too. Jay, you talked a little bit about how you're guiding folks to be more resilient. Maybe can you talk a little bit more?
Especially in the case of, when I think about small businesses, I'm talking about oftentimes mom and pop stores. They don't have a C-suite. So I think that the mechanism that you've identified in your program too that is really helpful there is insurance, because that's the way to protect yourself for a risk that you don't want to bear yourself, or you don't really understand as well. And so I think that for small and medium-sized businesses to talk to their insurance agent and say, well, am I protected? What about climate change? How is that going to protect me? Severe weather events? Am I protected? That's, I think, where one very useful way to have a conversation for them to help them protect themselves.
Small to medium-sized companies, they don't have climate scientists, and they don't have really the resources. So I think in reaching out to your insurance, that's a great idea.
Yeah, I would just add that, what they do have is supply chains, maybe not complex, but they have them. So my advice would be collect some data, try to map your supply chain, and look for those high impact areas. And there are tools available for free on the internet that are simple and easy to use that can give you a very quick and dirty perspective on what your risks might be. I'm thinking water in particular. Like if you are a small agricultural company sourcing from different areas, WRI's aqueduct tool, some of these small and medium companies probably have never heard of it. It's free, it's easy to find. You Google aqueduct and it comes up. And within minutes, just typing in the address of a location, it will give you a feel for what the level of water stress is there. And to your point, Janet, which I thought was a great one about finding one hook, you need that hook. Water can be that hook. You show your team a chart full of a sea of red in terms of stress, and that seems to capture some attention. So I would say look for some data, use freely available, easy to use tools, and then find a hook that you can use as to grab people in.
Yeah, very good. And you know, water was an issue when we interviewed and when we did our workshops. Water was an area that was, I won't say every company mentioned it, but almost every company mentioned water as being. You know, we heard from Dr. Lours that there's a lot of data out there on climate science, and that's very different than when we first did our report a couple years ago. There's a lot of data, and it's a lot of data that's freely available. But there still are challenges. How do you use this data? Where do you come up with scenarios? How do you plan? And I know all of you have thought about this a little bit. Melissa has, I mean, how do you pick which scenarios, climate scenarios, to consider? You know, as the state of California, is there government agencies within California that help you figure out which scenarios to plan for?
Actually, yeah, we work very closely with state of California, for example, Department of Water Resources, working very closely with them, working closely also at the federal level with U.S. Geologic Service on some of their scenario planning. We've worked with NOAA on some of what they've been doing, and we've actually worked at internationally, you know, looking at some of the IPCC scenarios. And then we've done, contributed to, you know, analyses that have been done at the local level as well. And what we really try to do is, you know, take a look at each of those studies, right, each of those analyses, and kind of bring them together, right, see where the overlap is, and use them to truth test one another in terms of our scenario development. And then, you know, lay that on top of what we're seeing in our own system, what we've seen from our historical data. Again, you know, we are in an enviable position of being a larger company, and so, you know, we have our own climatologists. You know, internally, we have our own climate scientists. We've got our you know, own folks that have track weather, because that's what we do. I'm a meteorologist, right? Because we need to know that for our system on a daily basis. So we have our own historic data that we can look at. And so, but when we're doing that, we do really, though, try to, you know, take a look at what we have, but then partner with some government entity, whether it is the local, state, or federal level, because at the end of the day, we need that partnership. We need to work with them, not only for, you know, the investments that we're going to be making, but also to understand what they're doing on their side. What are they seeing? What are they going to be doing with their infrastructure? How can we partner with them if they recognize that, for example, with the new flood maps that have come out in California? Perfect example is San Mateo County. They got the new maps. Now they're looking at what they need to do to reinforce their levee system, right, for potential flooding. Well, what's the impact of their activities going to be actually on our infrastructure? How do we work together? How do we coordinate? Because if you're going to sort of increase levees, then all of a sudden, do we not have the clearances we need over our power lines? So do we have to then move our infrastructure or change our infrastructure? Or if they're going to do their work, how are we going to do our work? So there's a lot of coordination that needs to be done. And so it's sort of taking that data that exists, you know, again, doing our own analysis, but then really going out and working in partnership with the entities we're going to have to work with at the end of the day to make sure that we're all on the same page. Because I think that, at the end of the day, is going to make this a much more efficient and effective process.
Yeah, partnership seems to be kind of a reoccurring theme. Roberta, you've got these global supply chains, and data in every country is not equal. How are you assessing these risks for these smaller suppliers? How are you communicating with them to try to figure out what you need to be doing?
Yeah, it's very challenging, and you have to prioritize. The approach that we take is, well, we engage with all of our suppliers, or most of our suppliers, through CDP supply chain. So that is kind of our, you know, call to arms. this is important to us. We want you to report on your climate risk information. But then from a tactical perspective, we look at priority markets, priority parts of our supply chain, and the Kenya example is a good one here as well. Priority beer market, major buyer of barley in Kenya, crop that's potentially at risk. So we prioritize the market based on risk and business exposure. Then we dug into the local context in terms of the modeling program that we did, what's going on there, what are the specific risks to that particular crop, and hired some help to translate the science into insightful kind of business conclusions, and then use that to apply to our business decision making.
Jay, you guys actually create data.
We do, as an industry with lost cost data. We also, of course, work with the largest risk modeling firms in the United States. We have ongoing partnerships with them. And then where we feel that we have specific expertise on specific areas of risk that we have, we may take their data and then make proprietary risk models that we use internally as well. Obviously, it would be great if we could get data on climate change and severe weather events that one day would look like the data we have on lots of other perils that insurers face that go right down to the zip code level. We're not holding our breath for that. We're just planning to over time to just make sure that try to help our customers protect themselves, and so that we can feel comfortable continuing to offer the insurance. I would make one observation. I happen to be on the teams that responded just within hours both to the Joplin, Missouri tornado and the Moore, Oklahoma tornado just a couple of years ago. And it was fascinating to me to watch that those parts of our team who do have the data and know exactly where our risks are could within hours figure out if this was the path of that tornado, how many of our risks were potentially jeopardized. We still didn't know how much damage was at each location, but you could get a ballpark figure within hours about what a severe weather event meant financially to the Hartford.
Well, at this point, I'd really like to thank our panel. Please join with me.